Leading is hard, especially when people are involved. I want to share with you one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in 10 years of leading a local church's growing worship team. Here we go. Over the past 10 years, our worship team here has grown from a handful of volunteers to now close to 50 musicians serving across our various services and sites. After a few years of leading the team, I realized that in order for us to grow effectively, I needed to find a way to empower others while still ensuring we remain a unified team pulling in the same direction. To achieve this, we developed 4 values for the team. These aligned with the mission, theology, and culture of our local church, but also focused on our area of leading the church in worship. In this video, I want to explain to you why your team would benefit from developing its own set of values. Stay to the end, and I'm going to share with you the 4 values that we use in our local church to grow our worship team. You might want to steal or adapt these for your own context. So why should we use values in our teams? Well, of course, the best answer for anything to do with local church is because Jesus did it. In Matthew 22, verses 36 to 40, we see Jesus communicating to his followers, and they asked him, what's the greatest commandment in all the law? And Jesus sets out 2 values for his team, for them to consider when they led together and worked as a team, and that was love God and love others. So Jesus understood the power of having values to empower his team to fulfill the Great Commission. And so if Jesus did it with his teams, we want to do it with our teams as well. The next reason that you'll want to use values in your worship team is that it's going to help people integrate quicker. In a growing church environment, you're going to have to find ways to get people integrated and involved in your team as quickly as effective as possible. Having clear and concise values for your team makes it much easier for people looking in to understand what you're all about and assess whether this is a team they can get involved with, put their energy behind, and commit to for the long haul. Having values also allows you to evaluate and assess people looking to get involved in the worship team. If people disagree with your values from the very beginning, it's very likely they're going to struggle to connect and work together with others in your team. I've never actually had anyone disagree with our 4 values of our team, but I find I regularly have to clarify and contextualize our values with people to make sure we continue to contend for unity as we work together. Next, values are really important if you care about delegation and empowerment. Delegation empowerment is crucial for growth, otherwise you'll stagnate and everything's going to be coming back to you as the team leader. What do I delegate? I delegate song selection, I delegate worship leading, I delegate team development, I delegate band leadership, I even delegate the integration of our new band members. And to do that, I've got to make sure that our growing and developing leaders have an understanding of the direction we're going and it's clear for them. Having values provides these riverbanks, these boundaries by which people can operate and make decisions freely without being micromanaged. Values help them make their own decisions without constant feedback or correction. It's hard to develop and release other leaders if we're constantly micromanaging them. Equally, not clarifying or agreeing the destination and boundaries with growing leaders will ultimately end up in frustration and constant correction from deviations from the direction you're taking. The next good reason to use values in your team is that you can use them for accountability. I've heard it said many times, you can't hold people accountable for what you haven't told them. If you want your team to behave or act in a certain way, then you need to tell them that. You need to communicate it clearly. I'm not going to scrap that from the recording. You need to communicate clearly, unlike what I did just then. Having your set of values allows people to understand the expectations and the requirements for them. And so as people deviate and move in a different direction, you can ask them to come back to the values and use your values as the mirror by which people can reflect and respond to their own decisions. If someone in your team does something contrary to your values, it creates an opportunity for you to have a discussion with them. You might need to clarify the value to them so they understand it better and can get behind that value. Equally, they might disagree with the value, and you might then need to talk with them, and maybe you might need to shift your values because that person's got some wisdom or some insight that was missed out from before. We never want to be beyond learning and growing, even as leaders. And lastly, if that person is moving in a direction opposite to the values and they're not willing to align with the values, then it's most likely they're not going to be a great fit continuing in the team, and they'll be better off serving in another area of your local church without any animosity or friction. Using values to hold people accountable in your team is a really helpful way to remove the me versus you dynamic in conflict, and instead replaces it with us aligning with our values. And lastly, having values in your worship team is really important for succession planning. If you've got any desire to move on from your current role or your current position of leading the worship team, you want to make sure that you're investing in empowering others growing in your team. But equally, you don't want that transition to mean that the team goes off in a completely different direction. Having values that everyone gets behind means that you can change the lead of your team without the team coming off the rails. So having clear, concise values is so important for the successful growth and continuation of your worship team in your local growing church. So here are 3 ideas of what makes a great value for a worship team. Firstly, your values need to be clear and memorable. The team should be able to recite them by memory at any opportunity. Secondly, your values ideally should have a biblical backing. There should be scriptural references backing up your values. Rather than originating from some area of culture or tradition, it's great to have the genesis and the beginning of your values in scripture. And lastly, you want to make sure that your values are not methodology focused. And what I mean by that is that your values are broad enough that they can be contextualized to different applications. I think it was Craig Groeschel that says we should be married to our values, but only dating our methodology. And what that means is that you can celebrate the diversity in your team, you can respond to the gift mix that God has brought about in your people without becoming legalistic and formulaic in what you do. A great example for this in our local church was when COVID happened and we had to rethink how we presented and engaged people in worship. If our values were limited specifically to a certain methodology, it wouldn't have given us the flexibility to adapt what we did to best respond. And by having values, the whole of our team could make active, progressive decisions around those values that were flexible enough to move with the changing conditions. So I'm going to share with you the 4 values that we have as a local growing church here. And they are exalting God, creating encounters, engaging guests, and encouraging growth. I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. If you want to find out what all those values means and how they apply to our church and how they might apply to you, then click on this video.